Good morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. We are just about ready to get started, but if you have not already done so, or if you are watching with someone else, please go ahead and type your name into the chat box so I can get an accurate roll. We've got Paula Burke here this morning. She is the ANR agent and CEC in Carroll County. And she's been working with managing fire ants in pastures for a couple of years now. So she is going to talk to us about that. Paula, you ready to take over?
I am. Good morning, everybody. Can you, hopefully everyone can hear me. This is my first time ever doing this Zoom before, so I think I got it figured out thanks to Julie Lynn and Heather. So good morning. First, I want to kind of, I guess, do a disclaimer. I'm not an entomologist. I really don't know a ton of things about ants in general. I'm an animal science person, which is why this topic interests me. So I'm really going to gear it towards the things I've been doing and teaching farmers in my area about pastures and in pastures and hayfields for fire ant management. I'll try to do best at the end to answer any questions, but sometimes I get some interesting questions, and not having an extensive entomology background, I can't always answer them. So hopefully you can at least get a gist of, this is a presentation I usually do to my farmers. I've done it quite a few times now. And it'll kind of give you a good overview about fire ant control, or I really should say management for hayfields and pastures, and some of the things that I've been doing here in Carroll to help with that. So, okay. So when we talk about fire ant management, and I'd like to refer to it as management because you're never going to completely get rid of fire ants. All you can do is really manage the population. And so I always encourage folks to be proactive, not reactive. And so there's lots of stories out there. If you Google people that will pour gasoline on fire ant beds, and there's been instances of, the fire, it catches on fire and spreads to the house and burns the person's house down, and all he was trying to do was kill fire ant mounds. Or they like to get into electrical boxes for some reason. They like that energy, I guess. And there's been reports of fire ants, delaying or canceling a game because they caused a power outage. Or maybe your school or sports team, you may have fire ants on the field. They don't just pop up overnight. Those are many months in the making. So you can really be proactive by trying to manage for that to avoid those type of issues. And then some people are actually allergic and can die from a fire ant bite. My husband, Henry Dura, who some of you know, he's a Alabama Extension agent. And for quite a few years, he would spread fire ant bait at his son's school because there was a young boy there that was deathly allergic to fire ants. So that can and does happen. When it comes to the other thing I should say, many of you know I'm originally from upstate New York, so fire ants was a whole new thing for me. It took me a long time to remember to look where I was standing the first year or two of summers here. And so, it's definitely a pest that is a nuisance for us as people, and then obviously out in our hayfields and pastures. So I encourage farmers to try to be proactive, and that would be managing them and ultimately spreading fire ant bait. So as many insects, as we all know, key to success is understanding the biology of the ant in this case. And basically it all starts with a mating flight. Next time it rains, go out and take a look at some fire ant mounds. You'll probably see the mating flight happening, all these winged fire ants flying off to make a new mound somewhere in your field or your neighbor's field. And so there's many opportunities of more fire ant mounds to be made. There's a lot of ants at those mounds. The newly mated queen is the most vulnerable from predators, environment, and poor judgment. But we definitely have a lot of ants that we're dealing with. When you have 4,000 to 6,000 of immature ants in a mound per year. So there's many opportunities for reproduction of these ants. And so when one of the
question here.
Oh.
Shirley wants to know if the fire ants are just in fields, or can they be located around homes?
Oh yes, yeah. They can be everywhere, parking lots, around homes. But my talk today, is definitely going to be geared towards talking about pastures and hayfields for farmers, especially when we talk about what product you can be using, and the equipment that I'm going to be explaining later. Is really geared for the farmer. But yes, I mean they can be everywhere. I hope that answers your question. But for colony establishment, one of those queens flies off from the mating flight, and it just takes one single female to actually establish that mound and that new colony. It removes its wings and burrows into the ground, and then begins laying eggs. They hatch about 6 to 10 days, and they'll lay 100 dozen of eggs per day. And that's just one single female or one single queen. So the establishment really happens when she becomes the queen, and then about 1 month later, the mound starts to open. There's lots of workers. They go out and start foraging for food, and they start constructing their mound. And that's probably usually a lot of times folks in the wintertime, early winter, late winter, early spring, I get a lot of calls from farmers that all these fire ant mounds are popping up. It's beginning to warm up, and they're starting to kind of emerge. And by now, once the colony is established, the queen is producing several hundred eggs per day. So things are really ramping up in the mound. And yes, fire ants are invasive. They are not originally from here. I think Kelly asked that question. And so controlling them has definitely been a challenge, and it's been spreading for many years now. At the first 3 months, as I said, the mound might not be visible, and then within 6 months, it can really open up and be 3 to 6 inches wide, almost a couple inches high. Sometimes if they've been there many years, they can get very high. And so within, that 6 months period, you're going to see all these fire ant mounds. So back to my original comments in the beginning, if you've got fire ant mounds on a, football field, they weren't there, just overnight. They've been there for months and then just have finally emerged. So this is what a fire ant mound looks like. This part up on top, I'm assuming you can see my pointer moving, is the, actually probably can't. This here on top is the top of the ground, above the ground, and then you have this line here of where the ants are making tunnels. They're going out and foraging, but they like to live down underneath deep in the ground. So all this dirt on top is the dirt that they're taking out from down below and bringing it to the surface, because they're building all these tunnels. So there's a lot of activity going on underneath the ground. Even in the wintertime, you may kick a fire ant mound and you don't see anything. And usually in the wintertime, you may see a couple, and then they're really active in the springtime. In the wintertime, they're down below because it's cold out. So this is what the development of a fire ant looks like. This little tiny speck here to the left is the egg, and as you move across, you see these white brood that they call, and then eventually develops into a fire ant. So if you go up to a fire ant mound right now and you kick it with your foot, you'll see a lot of little white things. That is the brood. So you know that they're actively reproducing in that fire ant mound. So their growth and development, they're in the larvae stage for 12 to 15 days. And the fourth instar is the process where they need large amounts of protein. It's really required a lot for the egg production. So that's a really, really key factor of when we're trying to control them. We want to try to eliminate that happening. And by being fed and still reproducing in the mound, and then they pupate at about 9 to 16 days, and come out and start being full developed ants. And so the flow, you can kind of see the big yellow queen there, kind of to the bottom right. And she has nurses feeding her. She's laying eggs. The eggs are developing. They're pupating, and then all these workers are going out and bringing back food and foraging for food, bringing them back. That then again is feeding the larvae and feeding the queen. So all those ants you see out, above ground, they're basically bringing back food, and this is important when we talk about what bait we are going to use. And so let's talk about that. There are a lot of products out there. If you go to the local stores, there's a lot of products for lawns. There's granulars, there's baits, there's liquid, there's mound treatments. There's many different products, which can be pretty confusing to some folks. And so there's, again, 3 types. You can broadcast some granulars. You could do individual mound treatments. That's something I don't recommend for a farmer that's trying to control in their pastures and hayfields. You have 50 acres or even a couple hundred acres. Going around and finding every single mound is going to be impossible. Now in your backyard, in your home, that's a different story, a little bit more reasonable. But when we're thinking about farmers, the mound treatment is just not going to be super effective, because you're going to miss some mounds for sure in a large number of acres. So we like to talk about broadcast baits and using those instead. And so probably most folks aren't familiar with baits or haven't used them, and there's some reasons for that. Baits aren't not necessarily an immediate control, and people want those fire ants dead now. They don't understand how they work. They get confused with them being granular insecticides, and they're difficult to apply at the labeled rate. And again, I'll kind of explain what I did here to help with that in my county to make sure our farmers are putting it out at the proper rate application. Some disadvantages if you use bait, they are definitely affected by sunlight. So when you put them out, and we'll talk about the timing and all that in a minute, you got to time it right so the bait doesn't degrade from the heat and the sunlight, the UV rays. Timing is very important, and we'll talk about that. They don't store well. As soon as that bag has a hole punctured in it, the air is getting to it, and that can degrade the product as well. So I recommend, if you get fire ant bait, you want to use it all at once, and it's not something you just store in your barn or your pesticide storage area, because it will lose its value in terms of strength of being a good bait. And then many of the baits really won't give you control, from 1 to 8 weeks. It's going to be, again, not an instant gratification sometimes with baits. So there's a little time that goes with it if you're going to use a bait. The advantages are they're easy to use. They can be very cost effective, good use of your time. Just imagine a farmer with 100 acres going out and trying to spread fire ant bait on individual mounds. Instead, using what I'm going to recommend, the spreader, is definitely a very effective use of your time. And then the cool thing is the ants do the work for you. They're going to pick up that bait and bring it back to the mound and do the work for you in terms of managing and hopefully trying to eliminate that mound that you have there. So there are baits with insect growth regulators. The control is about 4 to 12 weeks before you actually really see some good control. These products we usually recommend to use in the fall time, which allows you to, over the winter, have some good control, because it's basically going to interrupt their reproduction. And so products that you could use on pasture or hayfields are two different products, Esteem and Extinguish, and that's their trade name. I also included here that you'll see what else these products are labeled for. So you can use them in other places, but not necessarily the same places. So like the Extinguish, you can actually use it around poultry houses, where Esteem is not labeled for that. So that's important to know. They're different active ingredients and labeled for various things. But in terms of pasture and hayfields, you can use either one for long-term control. The other product is, it's got a metabolic nervous system inhibitor. So this is going to give you a faster control. And this is what I usually recommend now in the summer, that if you're, if you have a farmer or with a hayfield or pasture, to use Amdro Pro. Some work I did that you'll see at the end of this presentation, we spread some fire ant bait out on a beef cattle pasture, and we came back in a month and we could hardly find any fire ants. So this is a much more fast acting. It still takes a few weeks, but much quicker than the previous products, which were the growth inhibitors. Again, this product can be homeowners could use this product on their lawn, landscape areas, golf courses, non-cropped areas. So this product, again, has multiple use. Both of these products, or all these products, I should say, they come in 25-pound bags. So for a homeowner, this may not necessarily be the economical, definitely probably not the most economical way to get their fire ant bait, unless they have, acres and acres of lawn, and some people actually do. But your homeowner that has an acre of land on their property, they're going to, use Amdro, which is labeled more on the homeowner side. But for farmers, Amdro Pro is what we recommend for pastures and hayfields. And then there's combination baits that have both of the previous baits combined into one, and that's called Extinguish Plus. Again, can be used in lawns and landscape areas. So this is giving you both opportunities to have an immediate, within maybe a month's time of a kill of the fire ants, and then also doing the interruption of the reproduction. So you get immediate and short term. This may be really good to recommend, someone that really has a bad fire ant problem, for a really immediate, and then hopefully helping them long term. So some things I've learned as doing this work, it's kind of important to think about, purchasing your bait. Number one, I find, even in my area, and we got a lot of agriculture in my area, this product is not regularly, the Extinguish, the Amdro Pros, it's just not sitting on the shelf at the feed stores. So farmers generally have to call, and they have to get it ordered, in the local feed store, farm supply store will order it in. So that's number one. They can't just show up today and think they're going to get Amdro Pro. And there is a manufacturing date. And so where this arrow is, there are some numbers there, and the bunch of numbers that says 180403, those first few numbers, that means it was manufactured on April 3rd, 2018. So 18 is 2018, 04 is the month of April, and on the 3rd of April, it was manufactured. I'm not sure what the rest of the numbers mean, but those first 6 numbers are very important. So you need to make sure you're getting a fairly recent product, preferably something made, in my opinion, made in 2019, maybe late 2018. Real important that there's no holes in the bags. This product comes, airtight. And again, as soon as air gets to it, as soon as you open that bag, or if a hole gets punctured in it, then the product is going to degrade, because it doesn't like to be. It likes to be used pretty immediately once you open the bag. And the bait should be a bright yellow color, sort of like what you see in the bottom of this spreader. And it should look nice and bright and yellow. If it doesn't, then there's something wrong with the product. So that's real important to share with farmers. I had a farmer one time, he said, I spread the bait, I still see fire ant mounds, what's going on? So we went through all the process of, when did you apply it? What color was the bait? Was there a hole in the bag? Just to try to determine what may have gone wrong. And actually, in the end, nothing went wrong. He just wasn't patient enough. So when to apply the bait is also very important. What's really good to do is either early in the morning or late in the afternoon. And that has to do all with the fire ants, of when they're going to be out foraging. The other thing, as I was mentioning earlier, that in February or March, farmers start calling, hey, I got fire ants mounds just popping up. What do I spread? Well, I have to tell them, you have to wait. You really need to wait till, late April, maybe early May, because it needs to be consistently about, 65 to 90 degrees, 70 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit air temperatures. Doing it in the middle of the winter to actually apply the bait is just not recommended. The other thing is doing it in the morning or in the afternoon to make sure that the fire ants are out there actively foraging. And so you'll see there a bunch of ants, and that's actually a potato chip. And what I recommend farmers do is they decide on a day that it's going to be dry. It's going to have at least an hour of no rain, or and at least an hour for the ants to forage that there's no rain. And decide that day, okay, they're going to go out and we're going to spread the fire ant bait. Take some potato chips, spread them out around on the field, not necessarily next to a fire ant mound. Wait about 20 minutes to half an hour, and hopefully when you come back, you will see fire ants all over those potato chips. That is a very good sign that the fire ants are actively foraging, and I would say that's the green light to go out there and spread that fire ant bait, and guarantee that the ants are going to pick up that bait and bring it back. With some of the work I've done a couple of years ago, we spread the fire ant bait and we looked at the ground, and we could literally see fire ants picking up that bait and heading back to the mound. It was kind of interesting. And I'm not really an ant or insect person, but that day it was very interesting to see that it was actually working, that they picked up that bait. So make sure it's warm and it's going to be dry for at least an hour of foraging. Give them at least an hour of foraging before it rains. Because again, this fire ant bait, it kind of to me looks like corn grits. It's got I think it's got a corn oily base to it, and it could easily just disintegrate with some good rainstorms. So this is the Herd GT77 seeder. Many of our farmers are familiar with this brand. This is a very popular spreader for spreading seed. This company, I don't know how many years ago, retrofitted it to actually spread fire ant bait. And so I actually purchased this fire ant bait spreader. It came with, you have to buy the hitches. So I bought the hitch that goes into the receiver hitch of a pickup truck, or it could be a utility vehicle. I also bought the hitch to go on the back of a four-wheeler. I have not used it yet. So if you do decide to get one of these for your county, probably all you need is the receiver hitch part. And so you'll see on the picture on the left, inside the fire ant bait spreader is this restrictor plate, they call it, this little metal square piece. And what the company did was calibrate that size hole in the bottom of that restrictor plate to properly put out fire ant bait. And pretty much most of the product is recommended 1.5 pounds per acre. So not a lot of product is needed to spread. But if you don't have this type of spreader that's specifically calibrated, that's where you're not going to probably be spreading it properly. So I decided to get this spreader, and I think with the 2 hitches, it cost me about $700. And again, probably only needed to get 1 hitch, so maybe it might cost $600, $650. And my producers get to borrow it. And so on this next slide, actually, let me just see. Yeah, let me talk before I move on to the next slide. So what I do in Carroll County, so I've purchased this spreader, and farmers get to borrow it. I ask for a deposit most times, especially if I don't know the farmer. I'm definitely going to ask them for a deposit. The deposit will definitely not guarantee they're going to bring it back, but at least gives them a little bit of an incentive. I charge them $50 deposit, and then I charge $5 a day to use it. And so I'm using that money when it breaks down eventually. So far, knock on wood, it hasn't. But you never know when someone's going to bring it back with the motor ripped off the bottom or something. So, or the wires get torn up. So whatever $5 a day I charge is going to go towards paying for repairs eventually. And so they come and pick it up, and I give them the short version of how to use it. The nice thing, it gives them incentive to maybe actually manage for fire ants with a piece of equipment that is calibrated properly, that really, at the most, people might treat for fire ants once or twice a year if you have a real problem. So for many of my farmers to spend, $600-$700 on a piece of equipment may not be cost effective. It's not in their, equipment wish list. They've got other things they need to spend money on. So this has been used quite a bit now the last couple of years that we've had it. And I would encourage you to think about getting one if you feel like you want to do this type of work. Your cattlemen, your farm bureau, they all may be interesting and help supplement, helping you pay for the spreader. And then, then you house it at your office. So, the spreader comes with different pages for the different product. It's all been calibrated, as I mentioned. So depending on so if a farmer is going to pick up the spreader, you need to know what product they're going to use, because you need to make sure the restrictor plate is proper. So in this example, for ANR Pro, you need to use plate number 0 or plate number 1. Both put it out at 0.5 pound per acre. But then what changes is how fast you can drive, the miles per hour, how far of the width that it spreads. So, usually most folks are using that restrictor plate number 0 and putting out 1.5 pounds. And then they're going about 10 miles an hour in speed, which is about what most folks do. So in 2016, we did some trial work on a beef cattle farm that had some pasture, and it was down in the southern part of the county. And so we went out and did counting of fire ant mounds. And so he had a lot of fire ants, and we picked 2 different areas. One area that we treated with the fire ant bait, we used ANR Pro, and an area that we did not treat. And in each area, we selected 3 sites. We marked them with this, the little orange tag flag that you can see there. We actually spray painted on the ground, because obviously cattle are actively out there. So we spray painted on the ground a little dot so we can try to come back. And I think we even GPSed it to make sure we got the same exact spot every time we came back and counted. And so we found that center point. We took a rope, and in that rope area, we counted all the fire ant mounds. So we knew in both sections how many fire ant mounds there were, and and we did this 3 times in each area, and calculated how many fire ant mounds. So then when we came back, we would have a good idea: did the product work or did it not work? So the results were this. So we had, in the treated area that we put Amdro Pro, they had about, before we started, they had about 64 mounds per acre. The untreated area had about 82 mounds. When we came back 4 weeks later to count, there was a 98% reduction of fire ant mounds in the treated area. The untreated area saw a decrease of about 45%. And so, again, we went back to the same circles, all 3 circles each time in each field. And so the question that's come up is, well, why did the untreated area have a decrease? You didn't put any product out there. Well, it's had a little bit to do with environment. That was the summer of a really good drought that we had. And in that particular area that we didn't treat, there was a lower area that had it was a lot wetter, had a lot more moisture. And the assumption we made was the fire ants basically moved and reestablished some mounds in other areas, because they need access to water as well. So, but in the treated area, we almost had 100% reduction. Not quite, but just about. It was really, really hard and really all over the field, but definitely in the 3 areas that we were counting fire ant mounds, that there was no mounds basically to be found. So that was a very successful demonstration that Amdro Pro really does work in a beef cattle pasture. So the cost of an application, so again, you put in about 1.5 pounds per acre. There's 25 pounds to a bag. And so the math comes out to be the cost of about $16.80 per acre. If that's too high for a producer to invest, to manage the fire ants, they could cut that in half down to $8.40 by using what they call the skip swath method, because your fire, if you're using the fire ant spreader, it spreads about 20 feet when you're treating. Fire ants move, so the I guess probably some research they've done in the past is that you could skip doing that swath, because the fire ants are going to be moving over that 40 feet or even more, and you can then use less bait and cover more acreage, and thus cutting your costs kind of in half. So that's a recommendation that we can make, and maybe $8.40 might be easier to deal with, because these bags of, and that the other thing I would encourage your farmers, the bait products range in price, even from farm store to farm store. We bought some product and go to a different farm store, we saved $100. These products cost anywhere to $200 to $300 for a 25-pound bag. So that can be a little sticker shock to some farmers. So I encourage them to shop around as well. You probably can buy some online. And again, but most folks are going to contact their local feed store, farm supply store. So I encourage them to shop around to get the best price. So in summary, treating pastures and hayfields with a bait product at least 1 time a year is a really good way to manage the fire ants. If if a farmer has some serious fire ant issues, you may want to do it more than once. You might want to do the spring and the fall. And then, once they get under control, maybe it's an every other year type of treatment, of spreading the bait is maybe all they need to do just to keep it down to levels that they're comfortable with. Using the growth regulator product in the fall is important for longer lasting control. Again, that's affecting the reproduction. So not an immediate kill within a month, but long-term that's going to be effective. And and for really bad infestations, I would recommend now or in the spring to use Amdro Pro, get a good kill on them, and then come back with Esteem, Extinguish, or Extinguish Plus, and have a good control going into the winter. On e-extension, there is some really good fire ant materials. At one point, I think they even had like a little group committee that did a lot of discussion on there. I'm not sure about now, but there's a lot of resources there. Every year, most years, I don't think it's happening this year, but most years there is it used to be called the International Fire Ant Conference, but now I think it's International Invasive Pest Conference. And they focus a lot on fire ants at that conference. I think it's going to be in Mobile, Alabama next year. It moves around, the Southeast every year. And so folks really want to learn more about fire ants. As an agent, that might be something interesting to go to. And again, we have some really good entomologists that we should be reaching out to. Alabama has done a really good job. They actually have a fire ant specialist. Fudd Graham is his name. And years ago, Alabama Extension, actually every Alabama ag agent in Alabama actually has one or more of these spreaders in their county for their counties. I'm assuming they must have had some grant funds, but they've really focused on trying to help the state get this, maybe manage it a little bit more across their state. And so, being married to an Alabama Extension agent, I was getting familiar with these, and Henry really helped me a lot to do the trial that we did at Yates Farm, and really decide, let's try to get a fire ant bait spreader in Carroll County, and it's been used quite a bit. I want to say we've done. I know it's over 100 acres. I had that in another presentation. I forgot to add it in today, but it's been about 3 years now. We've had multiple producers use it. They come back every year to use it, and really utilizing it and helping them manage their fire ants. So it's been a fun project to do, for my livestock producers. I've had horse producers, cattle producers, probably some sheep and goat folks that have used it. I'll let the bait spreader be borrowed by, just a regular landowner if they have a lot of acreage, a big lawn that they want to do. I don't think that's actually happened yet, but I would be open to that. So that would be, something can consider. But the bait spreader needs to be on the back of a pickup truck or utility vehicle. So, your homeowner that has an acre or two is not really your direct audience for the bait spreader, but more larger landowner, and then our farmers. So that's all I have. I can try to answer some questions.
Thank you, Paula. We've got a couple of questions coming into the chat box, and before anyone signs off, please, if you haven't done so already, put your name into the chat box so I can make sure I get everyone on the roster for Julie Lynn. So we've got a question from Shirley about household grits being effective in fire ant control.
Yes, Shirley, that's a myth. That's one of those, old myths that gets around there. Basically, if a fire ant, eats the grits, I think the idea was they're going to eat it and then they're going to, puff up and explode or something, I think is what I've heard before. But it's definitely not true. Using boiling water, that's the thing. It rarely kills long-term, really, product that's gonna, actually kill the ant. And again, in this case, the bait product is gonna affect the queen and stop stop reproduction or just kill the ants directly. So definitely grits is definitely a myth. We do not recommend that. That is not in our pesticide handbook.
And we've got another question that I had a question about too. Where'd it go? Sarah is asking about what was the combination bait, and I wrote down that you said it was intermediate and short term. Does that also give the extended?
Yes. So the combination bait is the Extinguish Plus. So that has the benefits of the Amdro Pro product, and then the Extinguish product. And so the combination, it's Extinguish Plus, you'll get, within a month's time, you'll get a kill. And then the Extinguish that's in the product will do the growth inhibitor and will help you long-term as well. So Kelly asks, is it possible to completely eradicate fire ants on your property? Completely eradicate, that's a pretty strong words. I would have to say no. You definitely, and that's why I say you can control them. We're never going to probably, unfortunately, ever completely eradicate them. All you can do is get to a comfortable level. So maybe on a small homeowner area, you might be able to get some really good removal of them. But remember that queen takes flight and goes off and establishes another fire ant mound. So much like thistle, if your farmer or your neighbor doesn't control their thistle, if they don't control their fire ants, there's always the potential of, a queen is going to fly over to your area. I have actually seen fire ants floating down a creek during a flood situation. And, obviously they could go many, many miles, and land on the next piece of dry land and, crawl up and establish a new colony. So completely eradicating is not going to be really possible. All you can do is try to manage them. Good questions, though.
Hey, Paula. This is Stephanie. I just wanted to comment. You had done a presentation for us for our Coweta County Cattlemen's Association. I think it was in August of 2017 or sometime around then. At our last cattlemen's meeting this past month, we had one of our producers that stood up at the end of the meeting to tell everybody that he had used the Amdro Pro, and he was thrilled with the results in his hayfield. So, and I don't know that he used the skip swath method, but I think he's basically decided he's going to go to the every other year application. Good. And so I just wanted you to know he was absolutely thrilled with it.
Well, good. And Stephanie, I'm sorry I didn't mention you earlier. Stephanie did help me with the Yates Farm field day. So thank you, Stephanie, and your intern that year. I forget her name, but she helped as well. So I gotta give you credit. So.
Yeah. Well, Stephanie was there. Stephanie was learning. Thanks, Paula. I missed the first of the presentation. I only was able to come in at the end, but anyway, I appreciate it. But yeah, Paula did all that work.
Now, Stephanie, did you purchase a spreader for your county?
No, our issue was we were trying to find the money, but I did talk to the Cattlemen's Association, actually it was a couple of months ago, and they're meeting tonight they're actually thinking about purchasing one as an association.
Great.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Any other questions?
Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. This is recorded and we'll get it archived in case you want to come back and pick up some notes that you may have missed out on. I think what have we got coming up next? On July the 2nd, we've got alternative gardening with aquaponics. So hopefully we'll see you again next month. Y'all have a great rest of the week and thanks for tuning in.
Hey, Heather.
Yes.
I'm sorry, before you, that other question that came through from Roger about how long it checks out the spreader.
Okay. I'm sorry, Paula, there's another one down here.
Yep. What's the typical length of time that a farmer checks out the spreader? A lot of times they'll get it on a Friday, bring it back on a Monday. That seems to be pretty popular. They may, pick it up one day and then bring it back the next. It kind of varies, but it seems to be popular to come and have it for the weekend.
Do you charge them for that, Paula?
I do. I asked for a $50 deposit. Again, it would not replace it with that, but just kind of a little incentive that they're going to bring it back and try to bring it back in one piece. And then I charge $5 a day to use it. And that helps me cover any expenses that I might incur if I have to fix it or replace wires or something like that, because it can get damaged. The whole motor is on the bottom of those spreaders, so if they drive in a deep ditched area, there's always the potential of something getting damaged. So
that daily fee is a good idea. It can help get it back quickly. We've had an issue with our hay probe staying out for a long time.
I'm sorry, I have to say that again.
The $5 a day would help get it back more quickly.
Yes. Yeah.
Didn't come back in a timely manner.
Right. The longer they have it, the more it's going to cost them. So some folks seem to be comfortable about picking it up on Friday and bringing it back on Monday. But again, others will just have it, for a day or two.
All right. Anyone else? Thank you very much, Paula.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone for joining us.